Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're going to talk a little bit about terrestrial orchids. Specifically, what the heck do we grow them in? Because they're terrestrial and they don't like bark. Do we grow them in soil? Yeah, we kind of grew them in soil and it didn't work out so well. What is going on with terrestrial orchids? Well, okay, we're going to talk a little bit about them. Got to take a few terrestrial type of orchids that we can grow in our living rooms. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the potting medium situation because I know it's a slight problem. At least if you're at the beginning, you're tempted to use whatever you use for your Phalaenopsis, well, that might not be the greatest idea. But don't worry, I got you covered. So before we start, don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it, and why not subscribe? I post multiple times a week and it's completely free. But if you're feeling a little extra and you can and you wish to further support the channel, do consider becoming a member and getting access to some exclusive videos. You can also use the affiliate links that I have in the description of my videos. Also check out the merch. We have mugs and a puzzle at the moment, and if you don't like any of those, you can use the super thanks option below my videos. Righty, so what I'm showing you here are two Habenaria orchids, which I don't even know how I kept alive, but I did. Anyway, that's not the point. I have two Habenaria orchids which are about to bloom. They're thriving and I'm so happy. I will make a care tutorial specifically for Habenaria soon, but what you need to know about these orchids, which you can actually find at nurseries, you can purchase, and they're not pricey either. What you need to know is that they are 100% terrestrial and they should not be mounted, they should not be grown in bark, because if you do so, you will probably kill them. There are a few types of terrestrial orchids that I feel like are popular in cultivation. I think the most popular ones are jewel orchids, the Nicosia, the Micosis, very, very beautiful orchids which we grow mostly for foliage reasons, not for flowers. They are terrestrial as well, and also slipper orchids. Slippers are a little bit special because I would consider them more of a semi-terrestrial type of orchid. I'm gonna get to it, don't worry. But again, they are the type of orchid that if you try to maintain in the same dry-ish conditions as a Phalaenopsis, they will not thrive for you. They need to have their roots potted inside medium. With them, you can get away with bark chips in some environments. Sorry, I talked a lot today. It's already close to noon. So with slipper orchids, you could get away with a more airy mix, but bottom line, depending on your environment, they cannot grow aerial roots because they are not epiphytic plants. And there are other orchids maybe that fall into this category, maybe some cymbidiums as well, some zygopetalums as well, here and there a few other types of orchids which we can have in cultivation. But if you've ever tried a terrestrial orchid in conventional medium, you know that you might have struggled a little bit with it. So the question is there a potting mix that can be universally used with all of these terrestrial orchids which will not kill them pretty much? Well, kinda. So first off, Habenarias. Habenarias are corm-producing orchids. The corm, somebody asked me what a corm was. Well, think about it as a bulb, but it's not really a bulb. It looks a little bit different, and it has multiple, let's say, points where new shoots can sprout from, but it kind of has the same role as a bulb in the sense that it will actually store energy for the plant, but in the growing season it will deplete itself, giving off this energy to the plant. However, Habenarias being deciduous orchids, they will die down in winter, and all of that energy will be stored in a new corm or two corms because they might reproduce. So with these orchids, you have a structure, a bulb, if you will, inside the potting mix. These guys cannot at all, under no circumstance, tolerate airy conditions. So for something like this, you cannot go with bark. That corm has a lot of fuzz. It's very dramatic if it dries completely. So with something like this, you can use soils, but if you don't want to use soils, what I grow them in, and what you will discover will be the main subject of this video, or the main character, you can also grow them in sphagnum moss. Only sphagnum moss. I top them off with a layer of bark as mulch. But you will notice throughout this video that all of the terrestrial or semi-terrestrial orchids that I'm going to talk about can actually be grown in moss, sphagnum moss, because it is the closest to what these orchids would prefer other than soils. Now, one thing to remember is that even if you can get away with soils with some of these orchids, you might have noticed, if you've ever tried it, that not any type of soil is okay. They still like airier soils, airier than maybe other plants. Maybe not so much Habenarias, but definitely Paphiopedilums. You cannot put a Paphiopedilum in soil and expect it to be like no issue. Sometimes you can, but most of the times you cannot. One thing you need to know about most terrestrial orchids is that they do not necessarily come from very heavy clay soils areas. They come from that layer of the forest or wherever they're growing where there's still a fluffy layer of branches and leaves together with that soil. Most of these orchids, and actually all of them, you will notice, don't have very deep roots. They're not like a rose, let's say. They don't put out those roots pretty deeply into the ground. They stay very shallow. And when I say very shallow, I mean like especially Ledicias, they're very shallow rooted orchids. Paphiopedilums, again, very shallow. These guys, look at the pot I'm growing them in. Extremely shallow situations. So when you have plants that grow at these depths, you don't need heavy stuff because heavy stuff can definitely suffocate the roots. Even if they're terrestrials, they still love their air. It is what it is. So that's why you can get away with sphagnum moss in the vast majority of the cases of terrestrial orchids. If you don't want to hassle with mixing your own special soil with perlite, pumice, maybe even bark chips and so on, if you don't want to create that airy soil-like type of mixture, you can just stick to sphagnum moss. And this will apply even in environments which are maybe cooler or maybe a little bit more humid. A terrestrial orchid is still a terrestrial orchid, and especially these, they cannot be grown in bark, in my opinion, successfully or efficiently. So with corm orchids, go either with sphagnum moss if you don't want to hassle, either with a mixture of soil and pumice and perlite and things of the sorts. Keep it light, keep it airy, whatever you do, and keep in mind the corm. I will make that care tutorial, don't worry, there are a few things you need to know, but at least from a potting medium point of view, you can get away with sphagnum moss or a very airy soil. Now, jewel orchids. I don't have any more jewel orchids right now because they really do like their very humid environments. I have my crested gecko terrarium, and I will try then whenever I see them for sale. But for now, jewel orchids are really not the greatest for my environment. What you should know is that they have extremely shallow and fuzzy roots. They're not aerial roots unless you grow them in extreme humidity. Their stem crawls a little bit on the ground and the roots just hug the soil. But again, you'll observe they are not deep roots. So again, they like that very moist but airy environment at the same time. With them, you can get away with either, you guessed it, sphagnum moss. I had them in sphagnum moss and it was absolutely fine. Either, again, a mixture of soil with an amendment such as perlite or pumice or whatever you can think of to make it airier. And the soil that you choose must not be heavy soil. I would not choose like rose soil. I'm going to roses because I'm researching about roses. The season is coming. Anyway, so I would not go with that rich, nutrient-rich, heavy soil. No. Stay with something light, something like African violet soil. That would be great. You can even put a little bit more perlite in it to make it airy. Most of all, though, do not let that soil become completely dry. With all of these terrestrial orchids, think very moist but very airy at the same time. They're not as drought tolerant as like cattleyas and everything, but they do like the air still. So that's the situation with jewel orchids. And PS, if you want to learn more about jewel orchids, I do think I have a tutorial, which is very good if you don't have oven-like summers like me. You can check it down below. Most people have great success with jewel orchids. It takes a very special type of person not to be able to grow Ledicias at least, and I'm that very special person that sometimes has issues watering. and I live in an oven. So yeah, that's the story with the Ludicias and jewel orchids and all of these beautifully leaved orchids. Very easy to grow, just be mindful of the potting mix and you should be fine with Ludicias. Now let's talk about slipper orchids. And I have a slipper orchid, hold on. I don't have many left, but I do have one. Oops. Things are very tight in this grow space. It's much smaller. Ah, oh no! Oh no. Almost did a boo-boo. Almost lost the flowers of my Cycnotus Wine Delight. That would have been sad. Right, slipper orchids. Again, not what I would call a fully terrestrial orchid because they do not like to be suffocated by very heavy clay type soils or heavy rose soils or even some normal potting mixes that you find at the flower shop. They don't like that stuff. Or if you plan to use something like that, you have to amend it again with perlite, pumice, bark chips, whatever. However, they are a little bit mildly, a smidgen more tolerant to airiness than a Habenaria, I would say. They do not have corms, they have fuzzy roots, kind of like the Ludicias. They grow slightly deeper into the ground, but not much. I mean, this is the pot I'm growing it in. And I feel like it could go into even a smaller one. But again, they do not tolerate high levels of air. So with these guys, you can go for sphagnum moss, of course, or what I use, a combination of sphagnum moss and bark, because they are just a little bit more tolerant to that airiness. Or if you feel like soils, you have to make a very, very, very airy soil type mixture for them. They will grow well in it. Just keep in mind it has to be airy. But also keep in mind their roots will not grow in the air. They do not have aerial roots. So even if the medium should be fluffy and nice, it should be rather moist. Not soaking wet, but rather moist. I guess what I'm trying, oh, and by the way, you have tutorials on these guys, like a lot of them. You even have one for beginners in the description. So with all of these terrestrial orchids, what did we learn when it comes to potting mix? Don't use bark. Don't use coconut husk, maybe. Don't use charcoal. Maybe don't use leca, although there are people with great success with slipper orchids in leca because they're a little bit more tolerant than other terrestrial plants to air. But generally speaking, Ludicias, these guys, not the greatest idea to go for these very, very, very airy media. Go for sphagnum moss if you have no choice, or a combination of moss and bark, why not? Or a very airy soil-like, which is not very, very heavy. An African violet soil will be great. And that's what you pot terrestrial orchids in, pretty much. Now when it comes to individual care, obviously, they're all a little bit different. You have, as I was saying, some tutorials below for the Ludicias and for the slipper orchids, a lot for slipper. Like if you search in the search bar, MissOrchidGirl Paphiopedilums or something, you'll find like a million stuff because I've grown them a lot. They're kind of fallen out of favor lately because I kind of have to be mindful of my space now and I kind of like other orchids better, but I did have a lot of Paphiopedilums in my life, so you can check those out. Habenarias will come soon. A tutorial will come soon because I have them for enough time and I have enough failure and success like to properly assess them, right? You cannot have a proper tutorial with knowing how to fail as well, you know, without knowing what kills them. And I know very much what bugs them. So righty, with that said, that's about it for today. Short and sweet. I hope it's short and sweet. Thank you so much for watching. I do know there were a few people like throughout the past couple of years that asked me about the soil for terrestrial orchids because they simply did not get it right. And I can understand it can be a little tricky because even if they're terrestrial, you know, they're not like other houseplants. They really like that airiness, but not too much airiness. Moisture too, but not too much moisture. Very complicated, but I hope this video sheds a little bit of light. And with that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me and I'll see you all next time. Bye.